living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
I am Michael Storm. It is Toward Anarchy. That must mean that it is Sunday, because we do this every Sunday from 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time right here live on the Republic Broadcasting Network. We get together. I have a little conversation with a friend, and it'll be on a wide range of topics, anything from social and political to economic and pop culture, and perhaps, depending on who I'm talking to, all of those things at once. Oftentimes, the individual that comes to talk, they're an anarchist, if you can believe that or not. And we have to ask them sometimes how they can get through life following all those rules as an anarchist. It's a hard thing to do. It really isn't that hard. Life is not that hard at all. It's not that complicated. It's beautiful, even though, so it's a beautiful spring day here in the middle of America. And by spring day, I mean it's wet and kind of crappy. But it's still beautiful, and that's the reality of it, because life is just not that complicated. It really isn't. It's a little bit more complicated right now, I think, for a lot of people. Boy, it's kind of scary. A lot to talk about, and I think we'll dive into it. Let's cover some basics first, though. As always, you can follow along. Go to towardanarchy.com. Everything you need to know is right there. It's a great little launching point, at least for staying in touch with the show and following along with what we're doing each day. For instance, today is April 12th in my world, and Dyreka Klaus will be my guest. And she's a mother, and she's an author, and she's an anarchist, and she's a wife, and she knits wonderful things out of yarn, and she has a book on critical thinking, and we're going to talk about her book today. So that is on the agenda. Also, we'll have to talk about the coronavirus and maybe some things to take your mind off of it as well. I shared some things, as always, some links if you want to follow along today. Also coming up over the next few weeks, David Horowitz will be joining the show again, and we'll talk about some natural law. Dr. D is going to join us. He's a good friend of mine. I don't know if I talked about D too much. He's a real good friend of mine. He's one of these guys that is, he's who I'm often talking to when I talk about people who are not, that don't actually use technology and don't follow along. And so they have a different perspective of the world than a lot of people do who are involved in he doesn't even use email and stuff like that. Nothing like that. He doesn't use computers at all. And so he doesn't stay connected. He's not in the social media. He has no idea what a Facebook is. He gets his information down on the ground, and he always knows. Anytime I reach out to him, he always knows what's going on, and he always has some thoughts on it. But then again, he doesn't know a lot about what's going on, maybe necessarily elsewhere, because he's not able to. His information is filtered. He has to get together with groups of people, and they're good people, they're trusted people, and things like that. But they can't. You know how that is. If you take a row of people, and you tell one person at one end of it one thing and tell them to pass it on, how it'll be, pretty relatively, I mean, if it's not something extremely super simple, anything, a sentence or more, by the time it gets to the end, especially you throw a handful of people in there, it's going to be different, maybe even drastically different, maybe completely different than what you started with at the other end. And that can kind of happen if you have too many filters. That's the point. I've talked about that before, how many filters there are on this. We apply all our own filters, but then depending on how you get your information, There's, maybe your friend's filter, maybe the filter of the news agency, maybe the filter of the individual who wrote the piece, and maybe that came from the AP, and who knows where that came from, and was it, there's so many potential filters for your information, and it's interesting that he's still able to, for the most part, keep along. But you know what the important point of that is he doesn't care about the politics and these, in the sense, of course, of how it affects all of us, generally speaking, the theft of our wealth and the manipulation of our markets and our economy and our health and everything. But that's the point of it, right? He gets all that. He has all that in place. He understands those things. And so he just practices life, the voluntarism, the anarchy, the letting other people do what they do all day long, every day, as long as what they do is in his respects, in our respect, is voluntary, right? It's all of these actions that we do, everything that we do every day, just the little minutia that make up the world, because it's all of us together doing those itty-bitty little things, seemingly almost unimportant things that we do every single day that make our reality around us, to build everything that we have, all that we see, all the information that we share, and all the tools they're all built on that idea that we make these choices and we do it without the consideration or the need for authority or its opinion on what we feel about these things, right? Or how we're going to handle them. So there's our basis for everything that we do. Go to towardanarchy.com, follow along, make sure that you like and you share and you follow and you subscribe. Speaking of subscribing, I always think of subscribing in terms of YouTube. We shot the video last week of last week's show, and I just put the interview between Rachel and I, and it has 254 views already, and I picked up like 20 new followers. And that may not seem like a lot if you're hearing that, and you know that these things could get millions and millions of hits. You understand that, but the web page the YouTube page is only a few months old, and most of the stuff is just an audio repeat. A lot of people listen live. There's a huge base of people who listen to the show live, which is really cool, because that's when I think that's when it's always best, because you never really know what's going to be said. You can almost be certain that I didn't do anything entirely stupid to make myself look like a fool if I went ahead and posted it in the archive. If it's up on YouTube or if it's in the archive, you could be pretty sure I didn't think I said anything particularly ridiculous that I felt I didn't want ever repeated from my mouth again, which is hard. You know how many words I say in a show? In just the 2 hours, it's crazy how many words it is. It's thousands of words. And it's funny because I'm always talking about how I have these conversations, and most of them are real. Some of the conversations that I have are conversations that I have in my head based on input or things that I'm seeing from other places. But most of these conversations I have are real, and I had one of these conversations this week, and it was it's always in relation to, when it's about me, it's always in relation to the word anarchy, which is why I use it. I think it's a great word. And there's no, okay, it's somebody who's never listened to the show. They don't know me. They think they do. They think they're entitled to it. And they have their own point. Their point is not to help me improve myself by being who they are and suggesting to me their views and the way they see things and then letting me decide for myself. That's not their goal. If it was their goal, they would do as I tend to do. I tend to just put stuff out there and let it marinate. But in this case, it's they attack everything about this. Oh, you're a fool. You believe that you and your little anarchist warrior group are going to to conquer the government and usher in a utopia, which I've never, ever have I said anything like that or suggested anything like that. In fact, I'm completely the opposite of that. I think that it's a waste of your time, especially now with this panopticon, this massive control grid that's in place. It's what's so important about what's happening now and why there's so many facets of it with this coronavirus and everything that is to come. That's what I've been saying from the beginning, is that virus this, virus that, as bad as it is, and all of the things that have been confirmed. Like, okay, so I just mentioned Rachel, and we'll come back to this because this is all important, but I just mentioned Rachel Nielsen. She was on the show last week, and she had just a little bit of a follow-up on some of the things that we talked about, and this is what had happened over the last week. Because when she was here, we were talking about how the deaths and things were getting attributed. They were being attributed to the COVID-19 and the coronavirus in a lot of cases. And in the past week, since that conversation, we've seen so much more proof that is happening. And if you've been watching any of the numbers, if you watch the charts, and I take them with a grain of salt, and you have to, but generally speaking, you can understand how this is true, because there's a government-driven, greed-driven panic about this that's created the situation that we're in right now. And it's driven the narrative, and it's driven the numbers. And when I say narrative, I mean story, I mean lie. So it's driven the narrative, and that drove a spike up in anticipated numbers, things like that. It was anticipated to be a certain number of a week ago it was 200,000, and then by the end of last week it was 100,000, and then by this week I think the health elf. The health elf, I couldn't remember his name before, Dr. Fossey, but because all I could picture is he just looks like this itty bitty little elf. He's our healer on this little adventure that we're on, our ersatz healer. If you know what the word ersatz means, you realize that I don't believe he's a real healer. Okay, he's just this sort of default excuse for a healer. And he's adjusted the numbers down. He continues to adjust the numbers down. But a lot of the stuff that we were talking about on the show last week was still sort of speculation, but it's not now. And here's a confirmation, because you remember last week when Rachel was here, we talked about the fact that there were 18 people in her hospital, in her county there on the western slope of Colorado. And that 11 of them were in the sort of intubated or secured off. She said this week, then following up just a couple of days ago, my hospital is empty and furloughing staff from all departments as well. My entire county has a total of 35 confirmed positives, 5 of which are hospitalized. So that means that since then, 6 people are no longer hospitalized and no longer as they were. And even more than that, actually, 13 aren't. 6 were just serious. They're no longer hospitalized based on the numbers that she had last week. And so that's over this week. About a dozen were discharged to home earlier this week, and the rest of the 35 required no hospitalization. So that's what we're seeing. Everything that we talked about on the show last week is what we've been seeing. It's really come true. The fact that they've been manipulating the numbers, and as far as that chart goes that I was talking about, you watch the COVID cases, death attributed to COVID cases, it's skyrocketed on the chart. And then all of your pneumonia and stuff like that should be right now at this time of year having some of its largest impact has gone straight on down. And I urge you to be careful here, to watch this, to pay attention, because you're watching right now in real time. If you're a vaccine proponent, not opponent, a proponent, you're a pro-vaccine, you watch this right now and pay attention to what's going on, because you're watching a real-time type of event, and the hype and the misinformation and the way the data is collected and the way it's disseminated to people, the manipulations of it all. This is the type of thing that has led millions of people like myself to understand, to know the knowledge, to know for a fact that vaccine science is a fraud, that what they're telling you vaccines do for you is not true. And because watch it. They're rushing out to get a vaccine for something that at this point what we're seeing is going to be less than the flu. And then of course they're going to make themselves the saviors. Here's a thought on the 14 days. Remember, it's a 14-day incubation period supposedly. Okay, so you say that when you're 2 weeks behind doing something about it, right? I don't know. It's just my thought on that particular subject. And again, another one of these. Oh God, I just get so tired of it. These conversations where everything is made up. It's like, are you having the same conversation as I am? Are we talking about the same thing? It happens in social media, and it happens in real life often enough too, that the conversation gets away from the point, and that's why they tell you not to talk about hard subjects, because people start investing feelings and things like that. It's funny because there's been this talk about how bad the internet is, and now that we're all sort of stuck inside right now, and how it should have an overall negative impact on people who are spending too much time online. And you know my thoughts about that is if you're having a bad time online, it's a tool, you're using it improperly, you're letting things get to you, you're not controlling your emotions. And it's the same way with all the information that we're getting. It's the same way with all of this across the board, with the idea that we have these communications tools at our fingertips, and the idea was that our communication will get worse, but I think that's not true. If you can convince people to have conversations that are unemotional, if you get people out of the idea that they have to be emotionally attached to the thing that they're conversing about, have some conversations about some things that you don't know and you don't understand. That's a good way to do that, to get in and learn to listen and learn to understand what the other guy's argument is based on. Because if you can't do that, you're going to have a real hard time defending your own argument, especially if it's something that's not as clear cut. When you're talking about ethics and morals and things like that, where other people might not see them the same way, it's hard to even say that I would call anything a truth, especially when I'm talking to somebody else. I would say this is the truth as I see it, or this is the truth as the individual that I found this information from sees it, and I don't see any reason to argue with it. Or that's the way I have to approach all of these things. Even if I believe something's a truth, I really have to present it as just my opinion, and that way it's protected, and I'm protected because I'm not making any particular claim about anything other than the way I feel, the way I see things. And if I'm not attacking you, you should be able to accept that and have a conversation with me, and have a real conversation with me that sticks to the point, doesn't attack the messenger, doesn't attack the labels on the messenger's box before you even open it. There's so many of these things that just keep getting in the way of it, and it gets very frustrating. But it's a development tool that you have to learn, you have to use for yourself, and you have to because it tells you at the point of the conversation when there's no more conversation to be had, where there's nothing more to be gained, where neither of you are going to learn anything anymore. And that's usually about the first sentence out of the responder. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy. I'll tell you about what's coming up in my guest, Dyreka Klaus. What you want to do is you want to go to towardanarchy.com. If you were already there, you're looking for April 12th if you hadn't found it yet. If you need to click in the archive, if it's not right there on the front page, it's really easy to find. April 12th is the show. If you were already there, click refresh on your browser and I'll see listen live now. You'll see how it changes. I just love having that control. It's right here at my fingertips. If I see something that's wrong or I want to add something, it's right there. I can do it right here. At any time. I've done it live, right, as we're talking, but I didn't have to change anything right now. Everything is in place. You can click on that listen live right now link. Otherwise, that same link will be where the archive is at. That's where you would find the MP3 archive, the raw file after the show ends, and producer Ken puts his magic on things and puts the archive together and gets it for me so I can post it up there. Man, you wouldn't believe, I don't know if you listen enough, especially on the weekends, to know about producer Ken and them, just how much would not get done if it wasn't for him, especially on the weekends. And right now it's pretty crazy because, Texas is on a lockdown, like a lot of places are. They're working on trying to get out of it. But, Ken will come to the studio there, the network, and he'll stay. But he can't do that because he has a family. He can't do that right now. And so he has this ridiculous, like 3-hour, real 3-hour drive, not like city 3-hour drive, like a real 3-hour drive to get to and from the studio anytime he's here. So he's been putting in extra miles and all this through this whole mess. And I know he's got his fingers crossed that governor there knocks that their stay off, that the stay-at-home order goes away. They've been trying here in Kansas. That's where I'm at. And it's made international news, in fact, because this is, Kansas has really been ahead of the ball on all of this. They were one of the first, if not the first, to shut down schools, to close off the, to have a lockdown, a statewide stay-at-home order. And the Republicans didn't do a damn thing about it. We have a Democrat governor here. And the Republicans didn't do a damn thing about it until this last week when she came out and said that no more than 10 people could meet at a church. And so then all of a sudden it was a big deal. And then actually their rights were in trouble. Sorry, guys. I know that you guys are there. And this is one of the beauties. You realize that this is how this works. Voters, Christians, anyone out there who has your thing, anarchists are the only group of people that are going to let, volunteers, whatever, are the only group of people that are just going to let you have your thing. You want to have your government, have it over there. Just don't make me subject to it. You want to have your religion, have it. It's fine. You have your religion. They have their religion. Everybody just do it over there. And I will fight. It's funny because I talk a lot in terms of how the statist should act, how I should expect the right, particularly the Christian right or the constitutional right, to stand up for things, and they never do. If you're looking at today on towardanarchy.com's April 12th, if you scroll down, there's an image that I shared, and it's Bernie, and it's a whole bunch of him laughing and just that his horse teeth sticking out there, that whole huge laugh of him. And it says, now that Trump has adopted enough of my policies, there's no reason to stay in the race. My work here is done. And he was out of the race this week. And it kind of just makes my point there that so many of the policies for the left and the right when it comes to government make no difference. And they enslave us all. Right now is what we're seeing right now is the battle, the back and forth. That's what begins now, is the which one of them is going to control all this new power that they have. And this is where we, again, have to watch what's coming. That's what's important. But my guest, Dyreka Klaus, she's going to be joining us here in just a couple of minutes right after the break. And she is author of the book, Think for Yourself, a critical thinking workbook for beginners. I bought my copy, but it didn't come yet. It was supposed to, but with shipping and things the way they are, apparently even Prime can't get you things here on time. She did give me a digital copy of it, but I haven't had a chance to take much of a look at it. But you know me, we're not here necessarily to talk about, a book. I want to talk to Dyreka. I want to talk to her about why she wrote a book, what brings her to write a book and to talk about critical thinking. And of course, critical thinking, a very serious, important thing to do at this time. And it takes practice. It really does. It takes a lot of practice because you can be overcritical, you can be undercritical, you can be critical enough. There's so much gray space in there for the world to be able to imagine you have an understanding of things. But if you have a real practical working sense of critical thinking, it was something that I enjoyed most in college. You actually met my critical thinking professor teacher. If you were if you've been listening to the show, John Berlew, he taught the critical thinking course that I took in college. We'll have a conversation about the book and everything else that she's into. And the links are up there so you can support the book, as well as her Anarchy Among Friends roundtable discussion on Facebook and some other things that we'll get to on the last part of the show. So stick around. Dyreka Klaus is up next on Toward Anarchy. Anarchy.com, that's the place to be, and you can follow along as always. It's April 12th, and you'll see there my guest today is Dyreka Klaus. She's one of these digital friends of mine, another one of these hoodlum anarchist people, and she likes to think for herself. She's a mother and a wife, and she knits yarn things. That's been her thing, apparently, since stuck at home. Talk about that maybe a little bit. But she's got a book, Think for Yourself, a critical thinking workbook for beginners, that I thought it would be really cool to share with my audience, because I think that critical thinking is extremely important all the time, but right now it certainly can't hurt. And I think we're going into a time like no other in any history. It's what I hinted at earlier in the show. It's this combination between technology and government machinations. We're at a point in history where technology is caught up with government such that it can influence many, many people and control their lives without having to send out the troops to do it. And so critical thinking and being able to understand information and be able to process it, to be able to use it, is extremely important at this time. So I thought it would be interesting that we could talk about that. But as always, the reason I do this is just so I can come and have a conversation with somebody that I find particularly interesting. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend and guest, Dyreka Klaus. Dyreka, thank you for joining the show. I really appreciate you taking the time. I don't know what's going on there. It's probably on her end, unfortunately, so she can't hear us. It might be tough, so I'll try to text her, and I know Ken is working on it on his end. He makes all the magic happen, so that's all. But go to towardanarchy.com while we're working that out, and you can see exactly what it is we plan to talk about. We can talk about the book. I shared a link up there. It's to the Amazon page, and that's where I bought my book, and Prime is not going to help you apparently right now. Because my Prime did not get it here on time. It's just funny. I keep saying it because it rhymes. It's one of those things that tickles my head when things rhyme. Dyreka, did you hear my joke? Does that mean that you can hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh, yay. That is so cool. I was just telling everybody a little bit about the book. If they go to towardanarchy.com and they look for April 12th, they can see that I shared a link there to the page on Amazon.com for your Think for Yourself, a critical thinking workbook, and we'll have to get into that and talk about that. But they know that I bring you here for my own sort of selfish reasons, and that's just to talk to you and get to know you, because you strike me as a interesting person, and you call yourself an anarchist, and I think it takes a nice brass set to do that today. So I thought we'd come talk about your brass set.
Awesome. I'd love to talk about my brass set. Thank you for the promotion of my book as well. I will say, though, calling myself an anarchist doesn't take as big a brass set as raising a house full of boys does. So, I'm kind of already set up to do big, courageous things.
Well, how many boys do you have?
We have 3 that live with us full time, right? So my husband and I, when we met 15 or 16 years ago, we each had one boy from our previous marriage. And his son lives in Florida with his ex-wife. But we have 3 that live with us full time. And then, all the friends and stuff. I'm kind of like the surrogate mom, and so there's at least 2 or 3 others that I consider sons of mine that are always around, and we have our 3 big dogs, and so it's a chaotic kind of environment, which is why I'm sitting in my car right now, because as I told you, silence doesn't happen in my house.
And no chance at finding a quiet space, and you don't have an office where you get to run off and type and write and things like that.
Excuse me. There's actually two office spaces, but it's just never far enough away from everybody else.
Well, especially for audio, I guess. Huh?
Right. We need some soundproofing. It's a big house too. It's something like 4,500 square feet, and still, it's just noise in every corner of it all day, every day.
What's the age range of the boys?
Well, we have boys from 7 to 18.
That's a good range.
Yeah.
So you're literally dealing with every male problem that you could think of, because you have a husband too.
Right. Yeah. There's also my 43-year-old husband. So yeah, we've got the whole age range, but it puts me, I'm in a unique position here. Even the boys are dogs, or the dogs are boys, excuse me. Sometimes I say things backwards. I get a little ahead of myself in my mind. It doesn't quite come out right. Okay, even the dogs are boys. So, I'm literally the only female in this house.
Up until we had my son, he's 9 now, so up until almost 10 years ago, that's the way it was in my house too. It was the opposite. It was completely surrounded by women and just myself, the one male in the house. But that never bothers males, because males tend to have that sort of alpha, the alpha thing going on. So it's kind of like I got my little clan and everything's cool.
Well, I kind of have the same thing, because that's just kind of the type of woman I am. I'm always in charge, whether I wanted to be or not. I don't like that term. That's too authoritarian. I prefer leader. Let's call it.
Well, I always think of it in this terms, as opposed to somebody who's trying to rule over other people, but more in a sense of the way that you get treated. You get pampered, and you get to make some of the big decisions. It's funny because in the house I'm the alpha. I make most of the decisions. I do a lot of the stuff, but I don't do any of it without my wife. I mean, she's 100% behind me. She's always there,
Right. And our dynamic here is just a little bit different. I homeschool, which probably makes me crazy. So I'm here in the house all day, every day, with the kids, with the dogs, with the housework, the yard work, like the homestead stuff we're trying to get done, assigning chores, assigning school, all this stuff. And so I'm the one who's central to planning and executing everything. So my husband deliberately takes a more supportive role because he's not here. He doesn't have all the same information I do. And sometimes it would just take a little too long to explain. So he trusts me because we get good results. And he takes the supportive role, says, what do you need from me? And I discuss big things with him, of course, before we do anything. But he usually likes my ideas, and that's usually what we go with. So he's a pretty easy guy to get along with.
It seems we have the opposite, where I'm the one that stays at home, and my wife is the one that has the career, and I've been the one that makes most of the house decisions, and that's the way we handle things too. There's a trust. It's a worked on, well thought out relationship, and we actually enjoy each other and ourselves. It's interesting because we see a lot of it sort of happening now. We're finding it going in both directions. People being stuck at home at the same time that we're seeing. I know I'm seeing this out there on the streets. Way more people, families together. taking walks, and it was way more than I've ever seen before. But then, of course, at the same time, we're also having a little bit more domestic violence and things like that going on right now. So it's an another interesting position that we find ourselves in with what's going on right now about what kind of future is it that we're looking to come out of here. And I think there's a lot of good stuff.
Right. And I feel like this whole situation is something like a crucible for the family unit. You're either going to come out of it broken or you're going to come out of it stronger than you ever were before. And I think which result you get is going to depend heavily on how mature the parents are, how much they're willing to really step into being partners, pulling together in the harness to achieve the things that are best for the family unit. That doesn't work very well with self-centered or narcissistic people, and I think that's where we see some abuse and things like that, because obviously that's going to make some people angry to not get to be the center of attention. But in general, I think if you have two people who are willing to be partners in everything, I think your family can come out of this a lot stronger than it went into it.
I think that's what I see happening in a lot of cases, that some families are really going to be strengthened by having to be together and not, well, there's a whole bunch of other stresses that are going on. One of those stresses in a lot of cases is not work. A lot of people they don't have to worry about work, and that's the one thing that they've always had to worry about. And so it's interesting that we're at this point where so many different converging ideas and so many chances to change our future. And unfortunately, this is a perfect example. You know what a Venn diagram is, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I saw one earlier. I didn't get a chance to share it because I figure I'll share it next week. It's one of these things that always applies. But it was... you find me in the middle of the diagram, and there's all these different facets of the COVID-19, the coronavirus that are going on, and with that there's the authoritarian government policies that we're seeing argued out now, as well as the concern about the economic devastation. And so I find myself able to worry about all of those things on top of it, and not just the rent or any of it. And it's kind of I don't know. There's so much to consider. It's nice to even just have sort of at this point, a conversation that doesn't even involve it.
That's so true. Yes, I'm sick of hearing about it, but I mean, I understand it's probably the biggest thing that's happened in some people's lives, like ever, but it hasn't changed my life almost at all. And so to me, in my little sphere of awareness, it's basically this big nothing burger.
Right. And that's I guess that's the only reason that I've even spent any time talking about it, because to me, it's really a lot of nothing. I've been very honest about this. Doesn't change me. I was always the guy. I have a bottle of 91% pure rubbing alcohol in my spray bottle. So I get down. I mean, I'm not a germaphobe, but I don't want to go into Walmart and touch things and then not clean my hands afterward.
Right. And, and I've always carried in my purse, I have this little hand roller. It's just a copper. It's like a piece of copper. Right.
Oh,
and it's just, and you just roll it between your hands. And I've had that in there for a while. And that's just, anytime I'm out in public, I always just kind of run it through my hands for 20 seconds or whatever when I'm done doing whatever I was doing and get back in my car. And that's about the extent of what I do.
You do something, though, you're aware of, and that was my thought. And I think most people probably do. And so I'm not, I don't go out unless I have to. I'm happy to
Right.
be at home.
Yeah, I don't
So,
either. I'm such a homebody.
yeah, none of this really changes anything for me at all, but I think it does for a lot of other people, and so that's why
Right.
I've talked about it what little bit I had. Of course,
Yeah.
thank you for hanging out an extra week and coming on this weekend instead of last weekend, because I was able to have Rachel Nielsen come on the show, and she's a nurse, and we were able to talk about a lot of the things that actually really we understand now this week to know to be true, last weekend. So it really was very timely.
Right.
I appreciate you doing
Yeah.
that. So that was really
Oh,
cool.
for sure. I felt like it was an important conversation for you to have too, for everybody to hear. And I'm not quite all the way through it. I'm kind of listening to it when I get time. I had just before that finished your last interview with John McAfee, which was fun. But yeah,
cool.
I'm so flexible. I really am. I can make anything work. Like I said, we're homeschoolers. I set my own schedule. I do what I want when I want.
Nice.
And I recognize that I'm very fortunate in that.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate in that, we've got a couple acres that we'd already started homesteading. We don't have to worry about much. We've got our big, huge array of solar panels in the yard for the house and, rainwater collection that we can set up in a snap. We've got all the stuff and our orchard and strawberries and the other stuff we're planting. I'm very fortunate. I recognize that I'm very fortunate that I don't really have to worry.
Yeah, but you're fortunate by your own means, and I think that's
right, by design.
Core of the point that a lot of people are missing when, you have all this, you're better off than the rest of us. No, don't you understand that I'm that way because I made an effort to be that person?
Right. I have 6 months of toilet paper and 6 months of food in my house at all times. I mean, if I weren't still wanting fresh ingredients, I wouldn't need to go to the store at all.
You're right.
We could make do with what I have in the house. But that's just something. I'm just like that.
Hey, we got to go into a break. This is a short one, and then we come back for a short segment. So after the top of the hour, we'll talk about the book and some of the other stuff and get into those things.
Excellent.
Awesome. Stick around. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy. My guest is Dyreka Klaus on critical thinking, and we're going to talk about that. We'll get into it after the top of the hour, and we'll dive into that. But I wanted to find out more about Dyreka herself and where she comes from, and how is it that you find yourself today calling yourself an anarchist? What's the background that created you, and has you prepared and in a sense, sort of aware and better off than a lot of people for times like we seem to be facing at the moment?
Well, okay. So how far back
that's
should I
a lot.
No, it's all right. In the very, very beginning, in my childhood, and I promise this won't be long. It sounds like it's going to be. So my mom was a farm girl. She grew up on my grandparents' farm. It's actually, this farm has been in my family on my mother's side for over 130 years now. So it's generations of farm folk on that side of the family. And we grew up, going out there almost every weekend, and we would go, help pick beans and haul hay and butcher beef and things like that. I kind of grew up doing a little bit of that. Not as much as my cousins who lived right next door, but, we did our share of it. So I've always been kind of oriented toward the family farm and growing the things you need and knowing how to do stuff, just knowing how to do things for yourself, not having to rely on other people.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
It is. I think it is. Skills and information are our most valuable commodity. None of the rest of it means anything if you don't know what to do with it. So that's, to me, that's where the most energy needs to be put initially, is into learning things. So, I kind of grew up like that and grew up in a more conservative household. And my dad is a successful businessman and, taught us about managing our time and managing our money and resources and things like that. So I had a good foundation for this. And I'm really trying to give that same type of foundation to my kids. It's not going to look exactly the same, but I'm doing what I can. And then, I served in the Navy. I was in the military. I was in cryptology and saw some stuff that just really made me not trust the government at all.
Really?
If I'm going to be perfectly honest. And my husband was in intelligence. So, it's just, I kind of always had this, I don't need help from the government. Anyways, growing up, we don't need help. We can do things ourselves. And then seeing the things that get justified in the name of government help, it just, the cost benefit analysis didn't balance the way that I thought it should.
Isn't that funny how you can speak of it in economic terms? Because I like to look at it in sort of economic terms as well, because it makes it real simple. The investment that you make versus the return that you get. And when you start weighing those types of inputs, regardless of what it is in life, you get to see that there's an obvious imbalance. And when you find it with government is that there's this huge misappropriation, misplacement of energy, time, wealth, just your entire being.
Right. Exactly. And so I was clinging to libertarianism and minarchism, right? Because I did my 12 years of government day camp just like everybody else did. And then I did more years of government service in the military. And, those layers of indoctrination are so deeply rooted that it just literally never occurred to me that not having government at all could be an option.
Oh, what a great way to leave it. Hey, we got to go through the top of the hour, but we'll be right back. We're talking to Dyreka Klaus. Go to towardanarchy.com.
This is RBN, the Republic Broadcasting Network.
We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Of this job. You can't really call it a job. I don't get paid to do it. In fact, I pay a whole lot of money to do it when it comes down to it. But I love this, and I love the whole live presentation thing. And I love knowing what's going behind this, going on behind the scenes, and all it takes to really make this happen and all that. That's why it's fun to do this show and to share with you the way I do it and the struggles that I go through in everything from getting guests to just having simple conversations and trying to remember things from 1 minute to the next and stay in the conversation. It's a wonderful thing to do, and I appreciate you joining me. Of course, we do this 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time, live right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network every Sunday, just to have a wonderful conversation about a myriad of different topics with somebody that I find interesting. My guest today is Dyreka Klaus. If you go to towardanarchy.com, you can follow along. April 12th, you'll see that she is author of Think for Yourself, a critical thinking workbook for beginners. And we're going to dive into that and talk about that here in just a moment. And you can buy the book. I have a link for you there, as always, to support her. I have a copy of it coming, and then, of course, she hooked me up with a digital copy today, so I don't even have to wait for Amazon and Prime. There's also a link there to her Anarchy Among Friends roundtable discussion page on Facebook, and we'll have her tell us a little bit about that. And I shared some other links for you there, as always. And this, I've seen this come up all week long, and I had already chosen it. Was the first thing I did. It was probably Sunday evening. I had this link ready to go because this was all set up. You know, we bumped Dyreka last week. She was going to be on last week. So all this was already kind of set up. I just had to drop a couple of things in there. And and then after I did it, I kept seeing it over and over and over again. It's the Friedrich Hayek quote, emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have eroded. And then, as always, a retweet here is not an endorsement of everything the man ever said, but there's a link there on the page that you can go and find out about Hayek if you don't know who he is and what he did. And, find out for yourself. That's the point about all of this. That's why I have the page there for you. So that you can dive in. And the biggest thing you have to do is you have to like, you have to share these links across the Twitter, across all the other platforms, subscribe, whatever it is, share this information and get it out there. And obviously you're doing it because we're reaching thousands of people every week, and the archive is just ridiculous. I see gigs and gigs of data going out every month on just these little audio files in this simple little page that we bring people to. And it's just amazing and wonderful and fun. And I get to bring you people like my guest, Dyreka Klaus. And Dyreka, tell us a little bit about how it is that you come to write a critical thinking workbook. Tell us what it is, why it's a workbook, why it's for beginners. And let's just talk about critical thinking a little bit.
Sure. And excuse my coughs every once in a while. I've got a little post-nasal thing because it's pollen season. Uh-huh. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
But so I, as I mentioned earlier, I homeschool my kids, and I have for years now. And so my middle son, he's 12 now. He was 11 when I wrote this. And I realized that this didn't really come very naturally to him. His mind works differently than my mind works. We just organize information differently and access it differently. So, I'm trying to reach him and trying to help him with things. And it became very cumbersome trying to think together through the problems he was experiencing, any problem, not just with school, but in life. And I kind of wanted to give him the tools to start developing on his own way of critical thinking, of doing this and things like that. So I started writing a lesson plan for him on Aristotelian logic and almost like logical argumentation, things like that. And I ended up really liking it. And I thought, this isn't too specific just to him. I mean, anybody could read this and go through this and benefit from it. So I'm going to save this for his little brother. So I went down to the office and I typed it all up and ended up sending it to a friend of mine, Jason Booth. And he runs the A Wolf in a Sheeple's World Facebook page. And actually, we were talking before the break about how I came to be an anarchist. And it's primarily because of him, because I encountered one person who put this idea in front of me that I had never even known was possible to think about before. And I think that person-to-person advocacy like that's really important for that reason. But if I didn't have the ability to think critically, it never would have sunk in.
Sure.
And critical thinking is definitely something that I want my children to have. It comes very naturally to my oldest son. So it had never occurred to me before that to deliberately teach it. So for my middle son, I was struggling to communicate this to him, and I communicate better when I write than when I'm speaking. So I started writing the lesson plan for him, liked it, typed it up for his brother, and I edited it a bunch and changed things around. And then I sent it to Jason. And I was like, what do you think of this? And he was like, well, I think you should publish that. And because the reason I took it upon myself to write it was because I couldn't find it anywhere. You know, I looked and I looked, and there are a lot of resources on critical thinking. But the problem that I kept running into was that all of them seemed to be polluted with bias. Like the author was using the fact that they're writing about critical thinking to kind of present their own ideas as the logical conclusion of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And I wasn't down with that. Because I don't care if my kids ever feel the same way about anything that I do. I just want them to put in the effort to reason it out for themselves. And I want them to be able to re-examine their answers as they get new information. That's all that I want for them on the topic of critical thinking. They don't have to arrive at the same answers I have. And I didn't want resources for them, for educating them on this, that would undermine that. So I wanted something that was more pure, just about the concepts, just about, the basic precepts of logic. This is just first step stuff for like tweens and up, really. Anybody who can read the book can absorb it. And it's short. I'm sure you noticed that. It's only like 22 pages of content, and then the rest of the book is like a guided journal. And I used the steps of deductive reasoning, which is a lot like the scientific method. And I use those to lay out kind of a format where they can fill in what their problem is, what information they think they're going to need to solve the problem, things like that. So that's how it came to be. And I went on Amazon on the self-publishing tool that they have.
Oh, is that how you did it?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I try to keep it really inexpensive. It's like $10 on there. I get $2 a copy. The publisher gets the rest.
Is that right?
Yeah. I didn't do it to make money.
On $10. No, of course not.
Yeah, I published it because I had trouble finding it and ended up having to do it myself. And I thought maybe somebody else would get value from it being already done.
Well, and I'll tell you, that's ultimately why I ended up buying it and why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I have children that, 13 and 9 that I think would benefit from it, and I intend to drop it on them, because luckily by the time I took any official critical thinking course, I already was well into critical thinking. And so what you're talking about, I realize is an absolute reality. If you're talking about going to college and taking a critical thinking course, they are, whatever bent the authors have, the tool, the book that you're going to be reading from, they don't just give you the tools. They give you their complete thought-out conclusions on whatever socio-political, economic BS they've got going on through their head at the time they wrote the book.
That's absolutely true. And so I kept all the examples, like in the chapter on logical fallacies. All of the examples that I used, not a one of them has anything political, religious, socioeconomic, anything like that to do with it. It is simply like activities of daily living, interactions with friends, activities that you have to do to cook and things, just like really simple, basic kind of examples. I just kept politics entirely out of it because that was literally the reason I had to write it myself, because nobody else did that.
Yeah. I can see that, and that was one of the things that was just like, okay, wait a minute, critical thinking. That's a big deal right now. We have this time ahead of us that is going to require that the children have some skills that I think they've been lacking for a little while.
I agree. And a lot of parents don't like to think about this, but our primary role as parents, to my way of thinking anyways, is to be building our children towards not needing us anymore. And that hurts emotionally to think about, but that's our job. That's our role as the people who are entrusted with raising these human beings to be, fully functional adults in society someday. So giving them tools is more important than anything else, in my opinion, especially mental tools. I really like critical thinking for my kids. I really like stoicism for my kids, like the Enchiridion by Epictetus. I love that. It's just all very, very important to me. It's about as foundational as it gets. You can't, if they can do this, if they can read and if they can think critically, they can teach themselves anything else in the world that they need to know. So to me, that is the most important thing I will ever give my children, the ability to read and the ability to think critically.
And that the critical thinking thing, they'll learn to read. It's interesting. My boy, the youngest, he's 10. He actually taught himself how to read on the computer as a little boy. He went into the education program knowing far more than anybody else in his age group, and it was just simply by letting him read, and not only that, by actually letting him do it himself. It's really great. One of the things that I try to talk to people about now is that we have to learn to use the technology and the tools that we have now to communicate with each other, because that's how people communicate, and it's even more noticeable right now where we're sort of locked up in our homes, that without the ability to function using these tools, and not just the actual clicks that will get things done, but the attitude. And you have to remind people, it's sad, and I know you see this too because we run in the same crowds. We see people who should have this thing down fail to get the basics right. They will complain about something like a tool. If the internet makes you say and do things and be a person that you wouldn't otherwise be, then apparently guns really do kill people. Spoons make people fat.
Right. And and that's a lot like something I said the other day. If your principles can't survive this crisis, you never really had them to begin with.
Absolutely.
If you're not firmly rooted, it's just like a tree. If you're not firmly rooted in your principles, 100%, the winds of fate are going to blow you over. They're going to uproot you and blow you over. So putting the thought and effort into developing your personal principles, using critical thinking for this is, I think, very important for our emotional equilibrium. Because once you're that rooted, nothing can shake you. And you just don't have to worry about anything because you're going to be okay. And to me, that's also important, really important for kids. I think people underestimate what kids can accomplish.
No question.
I think that people really underestimate children. Children have the ability to think about and understand these complex things that are going on.
They just do, and they have it without the clutter of reality. I wish there was some magical place, some number that you could put on it, but they're all so different, and they also vary from one to the next. Even the ones that you have yourself with the same person, they're always so different that you can't just sort of pinpoint a time where you can say, all right, this is the point where we need to start talking about this. This is the point where you need to start. You can't ever do that. So you just, again, you have to have the tools in place and the basics in place to give them the ability to work their way forward.
Right. And you have to be very responsive to what they're telling you, whether they're saying it verbally or with their behavior and actions. Being really dialed into your child is so helpful. And I'm a big advocate of child-directed learning. I really think that that's the best way for children to learn anything, is when it's their idea to learn it. they're going to retain it a lot
Absolutely.
better.
The proof of that is just my son. I always believed that, and I've always let my children be who they are and make their own decisions as far as that goes. If it's not going to hurt them, I pretty much let them make the decision themselves. And I think my son coming along, sort of years after the others, and is proof of that point in that he was able to teach himself how to read. I think it's absolutely, their minds are just so wide open, and they're just like little sponges. And so if you give them the tools and the want to actually learn, they're going to suck up everything.
Right. And they're going to focus on things that they feel passionate about. Yes. Whether it comes from a good, passionate place, like I really love doing this, or if it comes from a fear, I never want to experience this again, or I want to feel more in control next time this happens because I didn't like the way that it felt. Those, you give the children the freedom to pursue those passions of theirs, and you never have to worry about them not having a direction in life someday. It's
well, and even if they don't, that you've given them the basis to understand that it's okay to be directionless as long as you're still moving.
Right. I guess I meant permanently, or maybe stagnate. You don't have to worry about them stagnating.
Right.
Right. That's a better way to put it, for sure. So, and they have options. Options are so important. And I really truly believe that, as I said before, reading and critical thinking are the two foundation stones that all options in life are built on, because you can teach yourself anything else if you can do those two things. So
yeah, and then there are only a handful of other smaller lessons that you need to pick up to kind of get the rest of it too. And I make this argument all the time. This life thing isn't that hard unless you make it hard or people make it hard on you. And like the anarchy thing, the voluntarism thing, it's not hard either. It doesn't take study. It takes practice. It's the practice of the basic ideas and those simplistic ideas.
Yep.
Well, we got to go into a break, and then we'll come back, and we'll unfortunately we'll put the cap on this thing. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy. Anarchy.com, and you look for April 12th, and you will be able to find what we've been talking about today, and that's her book. There's a link there to Amazon.com where you can buy the book and help support her, even if it is only $2 at a time. No, you know what? I don't really have a problem with that, because it seems to me that they're sending you out a printed book, and you didn't have to do a whole lot to really make that happen. It's what we were talking about before we went into the break, and about this ability to use the tools. And in this case, it's one of these great tools, one that I myself have been watching for a while and intend to use before too long, and that's that self-publishing tool through Amazon. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Very neat the way it works.
And I'm working on the next book, which is going to be Speak for Yourself. So just some helpful guidance for kids on how to communicate effectively with other people, and communicate rationally. Yes. And then the third book is going to be Act for Yourself, and it's going to be all about, about manifesting our own actions and not letting other people affect our behavior, always being in control of ourselves and acting in ways that are in accordance with our own principles and rational behavior. So
great.
That's what the third book is going to be. Because to me,
that's really fantastic, because that's what this show is all about.
Right.
I mean, when the things that I'm talking about outside of what whatever I happen to be talking to my guest about, that's literally everything that this show is about. It's summed up in your three books. Do you know Shane Radliff?
I do.
Okay. Yes. Have you ever talked to him about getting under, he publishes. I don't know if that's something that you've ever looked at or if you'd ever thought of. I had him on the show, and I know that he does things like this, and I didn't know if maybe because I've never really, from the technical side of it, from the actual author side of it, talked to him about it. We just talked in general about what it takes, Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love to do something like that. For my own sanity and peace of mind, I have to finish all 3 before I try taking them to any kind of publisher.
That's great. That's wonderful. It's great that you practice what you preach, and I think that's really important because when we're talking about this, I think a lot of people probably tune into the show maybe the first time. They're sort of upset there's not an angry white guy screaming in the microphone, some angry white, rich, privileged guy screaming in the microphone about tearing down the government, because that's not what I'm about. I'm about living a life that makes other people jealous. If you want to be,
and to me,
particularly statist.
To me, that's what anarchy is. I mean, the lack of coercion used on other people is anarchy. And the only way that we can realize that is in ourselves, in our own behavior. That is literally the only way to fully realize it. And in my opinion, the only way to arrive at it is education and the spread of good ideas, because good ideas don't require force. Only the bad ideas require force. Good ideas do not require force. And to me, anarchy is a very peaceful thing for this reason. It is every person living their life the way that they see fit and not aggressing against others. And that, to me, is exactly what anarchy is. And that's what I would love to see. I doubt I'll see it in my lifetime on a wide scale, but I'm going to live it within my lifetime for myself, because that is what I deeply feel is right. And that's, again, the only way that it can actually happen is inside the individual.
Well, you can say a lot of things about religion and the Christian faith, but one of the things that the Christians get right is that let your light shine idea. That idea that the best way that you can live is the life that you would have others live too. The ones that if you would preach to them that this is how they would live, then you damn well better be living that way.
That's right. That's right. And I don't pretend to be perfect at it. None of us are perfect. I'm doing the best that I can. We're moving, and my husband is, he's not quite as sure of things as I am about this, but, we kind of are moving forward. There's always some kind of movement, and I content myself with that because, I'd make myself crazy trying to be perfect.
Well, you should have seen my wife's face. She's already pretty much sheet white, but she went even whiter, and you would laugh if you knew how white she was. She's a redhead.
Right, okay.
The first time she saw me using the Toward Anarchy, this is years and years ago, right after we first met. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
A break
the music, that's the end of it, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I thank you so much, Dyreka. I will. I'll talk to you a little later. I'll let you know when the archive and everything is up.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk about my book.
You bet. Anytime. You take care.
You too.
We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy. For the day, we did our job. No, that's exactly what I want out of these conversations. I guess it's really easy to do when I have such a great pool of friends to choose from, and it's purposeful. It's funny because you get accused of creating a sounding board, particularly on the social media and places like that, where you kind of control who you can be friends with, and you have all of these other friends and connections and things and ideas to base it on that you might not necessarily have in a normal friendship where you meet somebody and you get to know them over time or something like that. I purposely go through, and I've been given a hard time about it before, and it just seems silly, but I groom my page, my social media. I groom it. I block out the things that I don't want to see. I don't accept the friend requests. I don't send out very many friend requests at all, like none, basically. Maybe one here, one there. The rest, they're people who friend me, so they must see something. My accounts are open. You can see them. You can tell I'm a host. I It's anarchy. It's this. It's you can see all of this on there. And so if you're friending me, you should be doing so because of what you see. Because trust me, when you friend me, I go and I look at your page, and there's like Flat Earth. You're probably not going to be my friend, especially if it's like all over your page and it's the thing you're talking about. I can't do that. I won't go down that road. I posted something about it earlier. I guess maybe it was just yesterday, actually, about the whole idea that I would ever find myself choosing my friends based on their belief in the shape of the earth. And it's just kind of funny. It's not like I set out to do that, but it's true it's how close attention I'm trying to pay to the people that I want to surround myself with. And there's nothing wrong with it, because that's how I find myself surrounded by people like Dyreka Klaus and Rachel Nielsen and all these other wonderful people that are my friends, my digital friends that I've been having on the show. And Dyreka mentioned Jason Booth. He's another friend of mine that I'm going to have on the show. We're going to have a conversation. I didn't know, because it's interesting, because now I know of a chain of people that knew each other. I'm me, and I've been me since I was about 12 years old. And there's very, very little about me, including the anarchy thing, that has changed over that time. I've practiced trying the libertarian thing, and I've played by the rules and tried to, get people elected, and I've done all that stuff. But ultimately, I've always been a strong-willed individual, classical liberal, if you will. I'm since a child, but not everybody is there yet. Geez, I would say most people aren't even close. Porg, you know what a porg is? How do you not know what a porg is? That's funny too, because I only said it because it's that little face. There's one of these little emojis, and it's the face of a porg. It's right there. He's going, ah. And if you don't know what a porg is, they're the little penguin-like things from the latest Star Wars trilogy, which is funny because I was going to mention that on the screen in the background. I'm only watching it for the first time. I watched it for the first time a couple of days ago. It's the last of the Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, the Rise of Skywalker. That's what it is. It's on in the background right now. It's at the last battle scene, in fact. No, not Ping. No, I did not. He doesn't know what a porg is. That's funny. I guess he's not a nerd. He doesn't know what a porg is. But they're cute. They're little like penguin-like things, and it's funny. They even cooked some of them when we're eating them, and then the live ones were standing there watching them eating them. That was kind of a disturbing scene in one of the new Star Wars movies. But I mean, come on, you do it with chickens. There's still chickens right there. I mean, they're not watching with these gigantic, sad sort of anime-looking eyes like the porgs have, though. That really kind of gets you, make you feel about it. I don't know if that was a shot at meat eaters in general, some vegetarian or a militant vegan thing attacking through pop culture. That happens, People, writers, they get to slip those things into the stuff they write, for sure. Listen, there's so many things that are going on right now. It's tough to even pick a few to talk about or to share with you. But if you go to towardanarchy.com, it's April 12th in my world, or click in the archive, and you will find, if you're going there in the archive, you'll find the MP3 in the archive, and you can share that around. You can download it. I would prefer you not cut it up and present it as something that it's not, but you're free to use it. My voice is out there. It's fun. I have lots of friends that won't use the digital assistants like Alexa or Siri or Google, whatever the hell its name is. I guess it's just Google. You say, "Hey Google," I guess, because I just recently got it to where all of those guys will play the podcast for you. If you say Play Toward Anarchy podcast to any of those digital assistants. It'll bring it up for you. And it's funny because they say, oh, how could you use one of those things? I said, look, man, I've been doing radio since 1994, late 93, I guess. And there are thousands of hours of my recorded voice archived all across the internet in different places. My voice has been out there for years and years. If they want to make, and in fact, I've been arrested and they make you do the voice recording now, especially if it's a felony thing, and there's they make you give DNA and all sorts of stuff now. Yeah, that's a porg. Exactly. That is a porg. We've been reduced to emojis. No, we haven't been reduced to emojis. It's just that not everything requires a response, I think. We're not looking at each other in the face anymore all the time. So it's just as good as a smile or a nod of the head to acknowledge that you said something or that you're there. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think the greater number of emojis that we have, the greater number of expressions that you can make without having to communicate long words and sentences. It's fine. Of course, you need to be able to speak to each other in those ways, but it's absolutely you can use those short forms of communication to your advantage and understand them. You can't stop a larger group of the population from using the dumber aspects of it and not being able to use it productively. That's just going to be the case of all things. You just don't trust every moron to handle the tools in the workshop if they haven't proven that they can use the tools. It's just the same with the internet and with anybody's tools. I'm talking about their voice and their brain, stuff like that. No, as I was saying, though, April 12th, towardanarchy.com. The link is up there to support Dyreka and buy her book, and I recommend that you do. And I'll give you a follow-up on it. I recommend it based on our encounter and what she's saying that it's based on. I can't recommend it on having actually read it at this point, but I will read it and get back to you. I'm almost finished with the other book that I was reading, so I will be able to dive right into it and give you a personal opinion of it. Not that you necessarily care, but I think it will turn out to be a really good tool. And she's talking about this trilogy of books, and that really intrigues me. So she'll be back. You can bet on that. There's also the Anarchy Among Friends roundtable discussion there on Facebook. There's a link to that. And it's just a place where if you support voluntarist ideas, you're going to find you are comfortable there amongst the anarchists and other reprobates. More dramatic reductions in coronavirus COVID-19 model productions. And exactly. Everything that we've been talking about, this thing it's been blown out of proportion. It is what government does. I'm telling you, if you're a proponent of vaccines, you have to watch out, because this is exactly how vaccine science became a law. It became a fraud. It became how it's going to become a law. In fact, it's going to be something that's shoved down your throat or at least in your arm. And there's going to be digital IDs. So far, that's failing. But they're talking about digital IDs that are going to go along with it. And they're talking about not letting you, the health elf is talking about this, not letting you go back to work until you can prove that you had it or that you've had some kind of vaccine or something. And so what you're seeing is a real-time event that leads to the vaccine fraud that we have, because it becomes a political issue, because it becomes a monetary issue, because it becomes a control issue. These are the things that we get, and we get these dishonest arguments, as always. You know how much I hate them. The thing about the flu and trying to compare it to the flu. I've told you about the numbers all along, that they can't be trusted. I've told you that you cannot compare numbers in real time with numbers that are settled. And I give you the quotes around the word settled because I don't want to argue about it. I'm just letting you know that I realize that they're not really settled, that they're just some numbers. But that's another one of these things that it's over and over again that people want to beat you up about. And I just beg you, please, concentrate on the stuff that actually matters. And by that, I mean, you're not going to be able to convince anyone or change somebody over to your point of view if you're screaming at them and telling them that their view is wrong. At least if you scream at them, tell them a view they haven't heard before. But even better, don't scream at them. But here's the thing. Many people who get the flu are asymptomatic, too. That's one of these words that's been thrown around here a lot lately. Oh, well, these people are asymptomatic, and they can't tell. The flu is like that, too. Do you not understand? And I get it if you don't. But there's these people that want to argue. And they obviously don't understand, and they don't have any reason, no excuse to not understand because they want to argue, right? If you want to argue about it, you better know your information. So in epidemiology, it's basically understood if you take a group of people and expose them to the flu, that all of them will get it. That basically all of them will get it. They may not all know it. Many of them may be asymptomatic, as in there's no way to tell that they have it. Look, think about this. To some of these people, it's nothing more than a headache, or it's nothing more than muscle tired or something like that. Most people work all day. You can write off a headache, muscle tired, almost all of the symptoms of any flu or sickness or coldness that is in any way mild to you or across the board mild to everyone, regardless of what it is, to a bad day at work, having slept wrong, having a headache, all of these things. So that's understood in the realist epidemiology community. They understand that when you get these things, that pretty much everybody gets them that's exposed to them. If you're truly exposed to them, and then, oh no, at least I came prepared for some of this stuff because I get it. I know why everybody's arguing, why they're talking about these things, and so I have to address them. But I got to tell you, the current events, they suggest that my own particular position on things to not participate in democracy, the lie that is democracy, it's not only a moral position, it's the only moral position. The battle, this idea that we can be locked down by government, this idea that somehow our rights get thrown out the window, the things that we need the most to protect us from tyranny and the hubris of government and authority and the technocrats and everything that we have to deal with now. That's exactly what it's all there for, right? Those are supposed to be the protections that we have, and they're there for the worst times of crisis. But this is the worst time, supposedly. Let's just say it is. Okay, we realize that it's not. We realize that it's less than government's making of it, but government's taking this crisis, and I hate to see what comes on the outside of this, especially if there's capitulation by anyone. Really, it's tough for me to do it because a lot of times I will call out the statists for their lack of participation in their system when I don't participate in it, but you do. You're a voter, and you're somebody that's supposed to stand up for these paper rights, this paper tiger of an idea that we have of protected rights from the very thing that would violate them. It's the nonsense of it, but you believe that nonsense, so damn it, why aren't you down there marching on the courthouse? I'm not marching on the courthouse. I don't have to do that because I've already given up on government. Government doesn't represent me. It won't run my life. It has almost no bearing on me whatsoever. Even in lockdown, it hardly changed my life. Okay, it doesn't bother me, and I will put on my my black clothes and as non-PC as it be, paint my face black, and I will be out in the middle of the night if I have to, doing what I have to do and seeing who I have to see and taking care of the business that I have to take care of. No authoritarian will stand in my way of doing it. And if they do, God, yours, theirs, somebody's, help them. Because, oh boy, we're getting, I've said it a lot of times, and I'm not the first person to say it, but we've been at some point in our existence, we're somewhere between it's too late to do anything about it, but it's too early to start shooting. Well, I'm leaning a little more to the right in this thing anymore because we're not getting our freedoms back. So the only thing that you can do to make sure that you aren't locked in a cage, particularly if it's something that if you're exercising something that you believe is a core fundamental value for freedom and for life and for the individual and even for the community, whether it be a voluntary one or not to exist, you got to kind of die for it at some point when it doesn't exist anymore. Or you got to live for it a different way. Well, I've been suggesting you live for it a different way, but that doesn't mean that you're still not going to have to pull the trigger sometime. Boy, I hope not. And if you do, I hope you're prepared to do it. They'd ask me why I can't just get along, and I just ask them, well, why do you just go along? Because that's what they did in Germany. But they were just normal people. Well, we're all just normal people, too. And most of you just go along to get along. So that's why I don't get along, because you have to go along to get along. We'll be right back here on Toward Anarchy.
This is Toward Anarchy on RBN with Michael Storm.
I've watched The Mandalorian. You bet I have. It was the only reason that I signed up for Disney Plus. I actually talked about it on the show. Yeah, I watched The Mandalorian in real time, as as they were airing it. I watched the episodes. I didn't wait to binge. And I'm watching the Clone Wars. After a decade, they're finally closing off the cartoon. They ended the cartoon abruptly, and now they've created some new episodes. And it's been really cool because it tells the story of Ahsoka Tano, which is Anakin's Padawan. You don't see her in the movies, but the one cartoon movie, the Clone Wars cartoon movie, the one where Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka save Jabba the Hutt's son. That's that one. You see her in that, but you don't see her in the live action movies. I don't think. Maybe they once have shown a cameo or something. I don't know. I'd have to. Again, a fan, not a fanboy. I know a lot about them because I enjoy them, and so I actually pay attention. But I don't necessarily dig into all the Easter eggs and trying to find all that stuff. The hidden things in there. Just another couple quick thoughts before we wrap this up. You've only seen 4 episodes. You still have 4 episodes to go. You're rocking and rolling. I started to mention it just before we went into the break, and I wanted to just come back to it real quick because I don't know what you know about any of this stuff, epidemiology, virology, any of it. And there's this thing going around right now, and people talking about whether or not viruses are alive or dead, and saying that you can't catch viruses and things like that. Look, this is another one of these questions that it's not really a question of how. You should pay attention to the results, because it doesn't matter whether they're alive or dead in that sense that we know things, whether they reproduce and evolve, because they do, but they have to engage in the metabolism of a living creature. They don't have their own metabolism. They don't move, so they're dependent on host cells for their reproduction. And so it's debated whether or not they're actually alive or dead. But that's in our terms of live and dead. That's not in terms of the biological reality of what viruses do to somebody. So let's stop playing the game, the word game, because it's not a productive game. It's not going to help you win any argument. Let's concentrate on the results. The important thing about this virus across the board is what's going to happen and how government has used it. And that's why I've said all along, watch what's going to happen, because that's what's important. So much more important than what's actually happening in real time or what they're showing you is happening in real time. You can't watch. I just pity these people, because I know there's a lot of them. You can just look at the YouTube channel for it, for every single one of the in major news organizations airing the president and his little task force talking every day. And I just pity the people that are every day listening to it. Listen, go to towardanarchy.com. There's a link up there on for today, for April 12th, and it's to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast. Put it out there for free, the paper edition, in your home, old school. It'll be fun for you, something to do. I'll see you next week. Listen, James Kelso is coming up next right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. You take care.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.